All right. Well, I believe we're live now. So Amanda and Jim, thank you so much for being here. And to those of you who are online with us, welcome. We are doing a mental health webinar, and we have been in a pandemic for almost a year, and it has taken a toll physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And so we thought, hey, let's have a conversation. I want to have a conversation with some experts, some people who are in the field. And so I want to turn it over to them to introduce themselves and give you a chance, who's watching, to get just a snapshot of who they are and where they work and what they do in their practice. So, Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I'm a marriage and family therapist. I work for Down to Earth Therapy in St. Paul. I work with kind of people across the lifespan, right? So I work with kids, I work with teenagers, young adults, couples, and just kind of a variety of outpatient mental health. So.
Excellent.
Awesome. And my name is Jim Simney. I'm a clinical social worker, and currently I practice at Rosemont High School as part of Independent School District 196. And then I also have a private practice within the emergency departments within the Fairview healthcare system at Fairview Southdale, Fairview Ridges, and telemedicine, doing crisis-based mental and chemical health assessments in the emergency department. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you both for being here. And just a note, if you are experiencing currently some mental illness, or you're having some unhealthy thoughts or unhelpful thoughts, and you're not sure if you need help, if it's first of all, call 911 because they can direct you. Secondly, go ahead and leave a comment in the chat or reach out to Restoration Church. We have a referral network, and we can either get you in touch with one of these therapists here or one of the therapists that are in our network. We know that there's a lot of therapy places that are really busy, but again, many hands make the work easier. And so within this network, we'll hopefully be able to get you to someone who can see you sooner than later and get you the help you need. Also, just to note, we're all three professionals. Obviously, Jim and Amanda have expertise in their area, and the things they talk about today are educational and expert advice, but don't always represent the opinions or the statements of their institutions. So just know we're individuals having a conversation to become aware of and improve our mental health. So with that, I thought we could get started with just kind of an overview of what you've seen as you look back at this whole year, both of you, Jim and Amanda. What have you seen in the people you see, in the communities you serve, as far as what the pandemic has done to our mental health? Jim, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. Okay. Well, in the emergency department, the last 12 months, we've definitely seen an uptick, a rise in encounters with patients related to mental and chemical health. The good news around that is that they still keep coming and seeking out that support, even in the midst of being in a pandemic. So we're grateful that they trust emergency medicine to be present and seek out that care. At the high school level, I think you could look at it from a couple different ways. There's a new population of students that have embraced their mental health, or at least created some additional increased awareness around that. And then you have some that are on the opposite end of the spectrum who might be minimizing to some degree. And then we have that unknown base in between both of those poles. So, we're working hard to try to assess and be proactive rather than reactive around awareness and outreach and implementation of supports in our building. And then at the community level, I think what I've seen with parents, guardians, adults, neighbors, an increased validation and awareness. People that maybe were overtly not as supportive towards mental health 12, 13 months ago, or maybe they were, but they were more silent about it because of perceived risk or shame. They're more outwardly speaking about their struggles, or at least their need to be proactive. So there's been many shifts in my observation.
Yeah, that's, I hadn't thought of that because for at least the last 10 or 15 years, I've been a proponent and even a practicer of, mental health and getting help for my mental health. And so the destigmatization, at least in my circles, has been there. But what I'm hearing you say is, in a lot of cases, that wasn't the case. And so,
Right.
Maybe one of the good things, if we can call it that, of this pandemic is just more of an openness and awareness, and maybe a normalcy. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, I think normalcy is a good theme, and even a healthy sense of vulnerability. Where we all have to take a knee once in a while, sometimes too, and that's a helpful experience and tool to be able to hold on to firmly, moving forward. So, I think that's a good summary. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. How about you, Amanda? What have you seen?
I first of all just want to say I can validate a lot of the things that Jim, you were talking about. I just the sheer volume, and people reaching out has just escalated exponentially, it seems. I know at my clinic and clinics all around us, people that we tend to refer out to, like everybody seems to be full. Everyone is reaching out and asking for more support and more services, much more than we've ever seen before. I would say, in terms of things that I've been seeing too, just the intensity and duration of people's experiences of a variety of mental health symptoms seems to have increased. Whereas people could come in kind of in expect to come in for therapy and have this be maybe a 3 to 6 month experience, get some tools, really works through some things. And then, my hope is always to equip people so they can walk out the door and feel a lot more empowered. And it seems like in these times, everyone's just needing more support, right? So I just notice a lot more people are kind of needing to hang on a lot longer. Um, and and also, yeah, just that sense of normalcy, like experiencing a lot of mental health symptoms, seems to be a lot more just kind of a part of our everyday, for a lot of us. So, mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that. That duration piece. We were told, at least in my circles, we were told, don't think this is going to be this really short window, or by Easter it's going to be fine. It's going to be this long haul. But it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to now be, like I said, almost a year, and be like, whoa, this has been a really long time. And so people who feel like they're white knuckling or holding on, it's, what I'm hearing you say is, the grips are wearing out, and maybe even the tools that I had, even if I had more than one tool, are starting to run out. Is that the case?
I would say so. I mean, part of the challenge is that, I mean, we're all going through this together, and there's um, a lot of unknowns that we're all grappling with. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know kind of how things are going to change in our world from day to day, and how they may or may not impact us. And just to live with that level of unknown is a stressful experience. And so that's bound to bring up a lot more stress and a lot more just kind of negative coping.
Yeah. So when I hear you say, that like the negative coping, the stress, the length of this, and this probably is a question for both of you, like, how do I know when it's just normal struggle, like this is long, and when it's mental health struggle, like maybe I can't do this on my own, or maybe I need help? How would you differentiate?
Hmm. Uh, well, I'll start. I think one of the first things that I like to look at is this impacting your ability to function every day, whether that's in your work, your school? Are you finding yourself, maybe you're a really solid student and the pandemic hit and your grades are tanking and it's just hard to sustain. It's hard to keep on going. It's hard to get out of bed every day. Things where it makes it a struggle just to do basic everyday functions, which I think living in the pandemic, we're all experiencing some of that, just as it is. Like things are a lot harder. But if you're finding things like I'm angry a lot and I just can't seem
Mm,
to control it, right? Or maybe I'm I'm getting into fights with my partner all the time. And before the pandemic, our marriage seemed to be just fine. And now it seems like we're on the rocks, right? Like signs like that, where it's hard to really like even be able to do the most basic of things every day might be a sign that it's a good time to reach out for some help.
Sure. I think those are great points, Amanda, and I'll build off of that. I was recently in a consult group with a really well-known clinician in the Twin Cities area. Her name is Ann Garrity at the U of M, and she made a really incredible differentiation between mental health, mental distress, and mental illness. And when we think of mental health, that should be embodied with wellness, adaptability, not surviving but thriving. All pistons are firing, and we're strong, and we're hardy, and we feel fulfilled. When we think of distress, that's more of those minor disruptions. It could be unexpected stress. It could be friction. Because of academics, it could be relationally wired. Whatever that source of friction is, it's more of a speed bump in the parking lot, if you will. It's not a permanent disabling piece, but it doesn't have that duration and intensity that Amanda was talking about earlier. But then when we get into mental illness, we're looking at more of a shutdown and disabling of our functioning, like she was talking about, with our function, flow, psychologically, self-care. All of these things seem unbalanced or incongruent and abnormal. And when we look at that, I often talk to students and parents about self-care. We look at activity levels, we look at our academic performance, and then we look at our social. So those 4 prongs, not that they're absolute or scientific in their individual sense, but typically I give the advice that if we're off-centered on at least 2 of those or more, then we need to take a little bit more closer look at what is causing that. Is it because of a disruption that's expected, and why wouldn't we have that? Or is it more along the lines of what Amanda was talking about with that persistence and that duration and that intensity, where it's hard to reclaim that to get that balance back because of our organic strengths?
So what did you say those pillars or those areas of your life, if you will, those tanks?
Like we talk about self-care. So, what are we doing for, hygiene, sleep, nutrition, exercise, all those things that invigorate us or give us serenity or peace. We talk about activity, which is a little bit redundant, but, what are we doing with our space? I'm in my office here at home, which is nice. It's more than appropriate, and I'm grateful for it. But I got to make sure I get out of this office too, and I need to look at different walls and see different people, because as safe as it is right here, it doesn't give me all that I need, and I need to look elsewhere to get that need met. And that comes through activity and motion. And then we look at our academic or our job performance or fulfillment, and then that social piece. So those 4 pieces are really, I think, simple and easy for anyone to latch onto, to sort of start to begin internal self-assessment or rely on others to help give them feedback as to where they're at in that journey.
Sure. What I think I'm hearing from both of what you guys are saying is, first of all, what are the things that I'm doing? There's a lot of things I can't control in this pandemic, and in just the state of life, and for Americans, I think we're not used to that. There is a lot of things that either through advertising or through messaging that we're told that that we can control, or we're given this facade that we can control. So the pandemic has kind of flipped much of that, and so we're in a place where, at least in my opinion, we're in this place where there's less we can control. But what I heard you say is we can control our eating. Most of us, if we're at a certain economic status, we can control our eating. We can control our sleep. And for some people, that's been hard. We can control our exercise. I think there is a piece where we felt like we haven't been able to control as much the relationships, just with different pauses and stay at home orders and things that, so when a few of those things are taken away, we start to, what I'm hearing you say is we start to Well, I'll pause that thought. But then I also heard you say this idea of a mental health spectrum from like mentally healthy and thriving all the way down to a couple of those markers were maybe distress, did I hear? And then
down to, mental illness. And I think part of that distress piece is I spend a lot of time teaching to my population in the ED or at the high school that distress, is normal. It's part of the life experience. We have several students who believe that, the only way to qualify a good day is to have zero stress. And that's a setup for rumination, anxiety, depression, because, I very rarely have had days where I could say I'm 100%, have been 100% awesome. There's always a dip. There's something that happens. And, that's just part of the reality. So I think helping at least our teenagers reframe out what is a reasonable expectation. And it's not perfection. It's not 100%. And I think that's where that distress piece comes. And I try to teach them along the lines with, with friction, comes fire. With friction comes good things. It's not always a negative thing when you feel discomfort. And usually that mid zone of distress is a tipping point for progress or growth to fortify your mental health above it, rather than immediately assume you're going to go downshift and go south into mental illness. So pain doesn't equal mental illness all the time. And helping them understand those three zones, I think really gives them empowerment and confidence.
And what are the three zones again?
Well, just that mental health and that mental, which is our wellness, and then our mental distress, which is more along those lines of expected, speed bumps in the parking lot, things that are going to tilt us a little bit one way or the other, whether it be we bomb that exam, or burnt out on hybrid learning, or digital learning. I'm scared about going back to digital learning. All of those things that, are going to hopefully sprout, new leaves and growth. And then we have, mental illness, which is more that biological, environmental, systemic piece that is depleting our function across all platforms.
So I'm reminded of some things that my coaches would say, and physical trainers, like, that no pain, no gain. And then maybe that's not necessarily true in mental health. But I also have, one of my daughters has this picture, and it says there's this little bubble that says comfort zone, and then outside of that comfort zone, in like dreamy letters, it says where the magic happens. And it's a little bit of what I'm hearing you say in terms of, as we talk about just like normal struggle versus mental health struggle, and thinking about like, well, how healthy am I? Because the speed bump that you talked about is now more like going from a state that has really good roads with, maybe a little bit higher taxes, to a state that has really bad roads. And it feels like we've been driving on a state with really bad roads for a really long time. And so how do you tell the difference between something that is a long distress and something that's like, no, this distress is a good distress. This helps us overcome. Is that a fair question?
Yeah. Amanda, I'll defer to you. I mean, in your private practice, how do you pursue that or walk alongside your clients to help them understand the difference between the two?
How do I do that? I mean, that's such a big question, right? Because for each person, that's going to be so different. But I think part of it is, we do a lot of digging into like, okay, first of all, let's put this into perspective and put it into context. What am I struggling with? What's really going on here? I think for a lot of the people that I work with, they come in, and sorry, I'm not used to this microphone in my face. But they come in and they're really, really worried that something is very, very wrong with me, right? I'm falling apart. There's this feels like a big catastrophe. And a lot of what I do initially just is kind of helping people sort through, like, okay, what is like really a big, big, big problem that we need to deal with, right? Whether it's a significant diagnosis, if we have to look at something as intense as medication, or is this just like this, is this a coping skills thing that we need to work on, right? For a lot of us, we don't necessarily feel like we have the skills or the tools, and then we get stuck. We don't really know where to go. How do I push through this myself? And I always feel like that's a good gauge. Like if you feel like you can't figure this out and push through this yourself, it might be worth either reaching out to a friend or somebody that you trust, or if you don't have someone as a support in your life, then going that next step and reaching out to a professional. That's a lot of what we do, is just sorting, and figuring out, okay, like, where are you really at, and what do you need to get yourself to a place where you're going to be feeling just better and more empowered.
So that's really good, and that's a helpful clarification. So what has the sorting changed during the pandemic of how to figure those things out?
Yeah, I would say personally and professionally, yeah, because I don't know about you guys, but I feel it every day. I know that all of us are feeling that, just kind of that weight, right, of feeling more
Mhm.
isolated. We can't do the things that are fun and enjoyable, and if we do make a decision to go and visit somebody, there's all this risk involved, and there's a lot of just social pressure too that
Mhm.
everybody's feeling. And so I feel like that, just that sorting process is so much longer, and requires a lot more deeper work, because like this is just across the board, everybody's experiencing it. So it's harder to differentiate at times, like what's really just a natural reaction to the stress of the pandemic, and then what would, or at least, what's a mental illness, right? What's something that is indicating a deeper issue that I really need to address.
Yeah, that's helpful. Anything to add to that, Jim?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love the sorting analogy. That really struck a chord with me because, both brought pleasure and pain, whether it be the organization of my desk, the interior of my car, or other elements of my life that are more important than that. We're always constantly trying to organize and prioritize and sort, and with that comes clarity. Another thing that you mentioned earlier, Amanda, was leaning on friends and family. I think it's so important that if we suspect that we're struggling or depleted in any of those areas, that we ask other people that we trust, that we know that are going to give us honest answers, not just those that might tell us what they think we want to hear, but with that also comes that power that we have the ability to establish, what we call in this field a baseline. So if you look at self-care or activity or socialization or job or academic performance, take a look at creating a baseline. Where are you at right now in those four zones? And then track that over the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks. Develop a real simple, number system. A 3 is awesome, 2 is average, a 1 is, below average. Rate those days, and then you can look back on your baseline from tomorrow morning and see, are things going north, or do you feel like things are sort of stagnant, or are they regressing? And then also, without revealing that to those you trust, ask for their honest opinions and see if it matches up, see if there's congruency to that.
Yeah.
Because typically you'll find that if we're being honest with ourselves and we find those honest people in our lives that we trust, we're going to get some really good reflections, and they're going to match up fairly closely. So I echo what Amanda had said. Lean on others, not for just vague passive statements, but charge them with a task that is really going to give you authentic information about one of those four domains or all four of them. How do I look to you? How do I sound? How do I present to you? How am I doing at work today? Schoology as a student in our district, what does that tell me? It's only one piece, don't get me wrong, but it's a piece of data that will give you clarity nonetheless.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think about, as that, baseline, as we get that baseline across those different areas, then it just is what is. It's not what I want it to be, or what I think it should be, or what others expect it to be. It is just what it is. Whether that's, and I think if that's hard for people to think about talking about, for me, I go to physical health. At the start of the pandemic, it was hard for me to run 3 miles because I had just gotten out of the habit, and I was only doing it a couple times a week. And I said, okay, this is one thing I can control, so I'm just going to establish a baseline. And it was usually having to walk a little bit in that 3 miles. But what I'm hearing from both of you is, well, that's good to do in our mental, emotional, and relational health as well. Where's that baseline? And then to seek others' input, because we can deceive ourselves. So some of the people on here that will be, if they're not on here now, they'll watch it later. They do have children, whether they're young children or elementary school or even teenagers. What are some questions that we can ask kids to know where they're at, to know what's just normal struggle and what is distress I guess I'll say it in your terms, distress that's like, hang in there, this is good stress, this is developing a resiliency and an adaptability, and what is distress that could really easily lead to a mental illness?
Well, I can share a little bit as far as, how to extract that information, and I don't come at this with any sense of perfection. There's struggles as a father behind these walls every day, and but I'm trying my best, and with that, I'll go back, not to be redundant, but trying to just normalize to our students and our children that, stress is normal. This is part of the deal that we were given with life. It's a trade-off. And, I don't think we can reinforce that too much. I think we can model transparency, set that table that we can demonstrate and share out what have been our successes, what's our struggles, and what's even our failures, or what is our mental health. Is it strong, or do we feel that we're in a zone of mental illness, whether it be temporary or moderately or long-term? The other piece I try to ask my students and my kids is, more of that comparative questions. Because we all know, you ask a teenager, how was your day today? We get maybe 1 to 3 syllables, right? And then we're stuck. It's like, why did I ask them that question? But yet I do it time and time again as a father for all 3 of my teenagers. So I've been trying to ask more along the lines of as compared to yesterday, or as compared to last week. It sort of forces and elicits more of an expansive response that they can't justify a syllable or 3, 4. They have to reveal and show me at least a couple of their cards at the table, to use that analogy. And then sort of elementary, but still effective, I think, with any population of kids. The old question, if you had the magic wand, what would you change? If you had the keys to the kingdom, what would you change? And inevitably, right now I'm hearing across the board, for those that really love traditional physical attendance at school, that they are done with digital learning. They want to get back in school, so they sort of get stuck on that notion of all the things that they can't control. Well, that's great, thanks for sharing, but now I sort of tricked you, if you will. I want to flip it, and let's leave that here for a minute. Let's talk about what can you control. So for those that are missing hybrid or in person, for 3 out of 4 of our grade levels in 10 days or so, we have a return to hybrid. So that's something that they can control. They enrolled in that. They secured their spots. Our seniors will be coming back, I believe, March 8th. So there's choice and power on the horizon. It's not immediate gratification, which is yet another good skill for all of us to learn. But it gives them the chance not to be stuck in the mud. If they can get traction, and they can get to a place of power, healthy power and control, to at least visualize what's coming around the bend, that will help remedy what their original concern was when I asked them about the keys to the kingdom. Those are some things I've tried. Full disclosure, it's hit or miss, depending on the shrewdness and the engagement of the child we're trying to work with. So be kind to yourself no matter what you try.
Also helpful. How about you, Amanda?
Well, first of all, I just want to echo that idea of be kind to yourself, right? Because I think that a lot of us are being really hard on ourselves right now. And we're all doing the best that we can with the resources that we have. And I think it's really important just to practice a little bit of self-compassion these days, which I know is difficult to do. But in terms of like how to connect with your kid, I mean, every child is different, right? So some parents may have like a close connected relationship with their kid, and it might mean like, oh, I just need to check in with them more and say, hey, how are you doing this week? And what have you noticed has been going on? What's something that surprised you this week? Kind of open ended questions just to talk with them without any pressure. Some kids I've noticed they kind of need to know that like they can have a check in with mom and dad where there's no consequences about anything that they share. Because I feel like all of this weight and pressure too with a lot of young people just around. Um, Feeling so stressed in trying to function and doing their schoolwork and keeping up on their academics, logging in for Zoom calls, being present, that it brings up a lot of shame on days when they're understandably stressed.
Yeah.
I One of the things that I think I meant to mention before, but I see a lot of signs of burnout with young kids that I've never seen before. Um, and that's something that I've just been exploring with a lot of parents. This idea of burnout is something I think that we as adults tend to apply to ourselves, right? We work, we have crazy busy lives. Before the pandemic, we were running all over the place, and now we're stuck at home and we only see five other people or less, and it's stressful, and even that in and of itself can bring out a lot of emotional burnout because it's just long and continual stress that just it chips away at what you're capable of tolerating every day. And I think for our kids, like if we can start using some language, even using the word burnout, and talk about, as an adult, like I feel this way sometimes and it's hard. And when I'm feeling that way, there's some things that I realize I need to do if I'm feeling burned out. I need to get outside a little more, bundle up, wear 10 layers these days. Or, maybe it's I just need to set up some times to connect with my friends over Zoom calls or FaceTime, or if you're comfortable with social distancing or whatever that looks like. But I think for our kids, creating space to check in with them, and something as simple as, hey, how are you? How are you feeling today? I've known some kids who just like they haven't been asked that question. And maybe it's because we're all just kind of stuck in our own heads. But as soon as they get asked that question, I've seen some kids just break down because they're carrying such a heavy load. So I think it's good just to do your best, try to ask open ended questions of your kids. If your child is the type who might need something a little bit different, maybe it's creating some more space for quality connection time with them. We're stuck in the house and we're all bored and sick and tired of each other, at least for many of us. But I think if we can create a little bit of quality connection time and be intentional about that time, even if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes once a week, that in and of itself is just that's nourishing for our souls. And I think we need that so much more these days.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm hearing that if you have this standard, both of you have said this, like if your standard is perfection, you're going to struggle a lot, whether you're an adult or whether you're a teenager or whether you're a kid. So just this idea of either perfection or that there won't be any challenge, like there won't be anything hard. I think this year has proven that there will be hard things.
Yeah.
Can you just speak a little more to the burnout, and then does that have anything to do with resiliency? Because I've read a lot, I've heard a lot of somewhat helpful, some not always as helpful, that this generation just doesn't have any resiliency. Can you speak to that in terms of how it relates to burnout, or maybe it doesn't?
Burnout and resiliency. I think a lot of kids rely on things that are not long-term supports, in order to, whether that's social media. Sometimes it's texting friends, which is a good, solid support, and that's important. It's not something I ever want to take away from a kid, especially these days. But some of the things that I've noticed young people have built as their part of their coping toolbox, are just things that aren't sustaining. And in terms of resiliency, I mean, I think I heard Jim, you talking about that, about students coming in and struggling with this idea of stress. And I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I can live with this kind of stress every day. And there is a difference between building some resiliency or grit. Some of us like to refer it in that way. In terms of being able to tolerate a certain degree of stress that I think is healthy. And then there's to another degree, there's just living with natural stressors that I think none of us are fully equipped to really handle without experiencing some negative side effects. So
Sure.
that's kind of what I'm seeing. In terms of burnout, I think it's to be expected to a certain degree that kids are going to feel tired. They're going to be tired of doing their homework. They're going to be tired of having to log in for Zoom calls and have way more asked of them than they've had to before. And I think that's normal. And if we can normalize that for them and validate that for them, man, I feel like that just goes such a long ways.
Those are great points. And I'll add that in my conversations with our students and even some of our high school students that I see in the emergency departments in acute crisis is when we talk about grit and resiliency, they sometimes, by no fault of their own, they'll overthink that. And they think that, that's a really complicated term or process where, I try to break it down to them that really it's just, can you show yourself evidence that you're not just moving your lips, but you're moving your hands and your feet? And, minimal progress, baby steps is resiliency. That's grit. You don't have to, be the strongest runner in the pack. You just have to be able to stay close by. And that support system of just people being proximate is going to give you residual energy you didn't know you had to see the task through to get to the finish line. So we talk a lot about that, and that's where it goes to the baseline. We have students that have struggled to log on to Zooms. They've demonstrated in their mind that they have zero capability or skill level when it comes to grit and resiliency. But, I'll do a home visit, for example, and I'll set the stage for them that, we're just looking for one check-in out of 5 of your classes tomorrow. That's grit, that's resiliency. That's something that we can celebrate. And then we can slowly up the ante and build capacity rather than say, I'm going to be perfect and I'm going to check into every Zoom and I'm going to get all my missing assignments done by Sunday. We don't want to do that because that's going to cause, them to be frustrated. And it's also going to cause them to feel like there was a setup where success was never truly attainable.
So I think what I'm hearing with that, Jim, is that, part of burnout is sort of the loss of, going from school to not school, and then going from, I've checked into 5 classes to now I've checked into 2 classes to 1 class to no classes. Is that maybe a simple definition of like how to see burnout in a kid is kind of going down like that?
Yeah, I mean, for some kids, it's quite the unraveling is quite slow to moderate. I'd say probably for 2/3 of the kids, it plays out that way. Where for 1/3, maybe it's very rapid and distinct, and it's illuminated quite brightly. Maybe within the first week or 2 of a trimester. But yeah, it's that ability to re-energize, refocus, and find that sense of balance and recognize burnout for what it is. It's okay to say that I'm running on fumes. We've all been there, but I think what are we going to do about that? We can talk about it, and which is great. Don't get me wrong. That's the cornerstone of a good therapist. But then we have to have an action plan to back that up through our actions and not just our words. And that's where, we try to support our kids to sort of take that leap of faith and say, okay, I know I'm spinning my wheels, I'm stuck in mud, but let's get that baseline. We know that we're all muddy right now, we're stained, but let's look to get just slightly more clean by tomorrow for those check-ins or other simple, easy victories that I like to call them. Let's not go for the grand prize right away. That's a setup for frustration. Let's build capacity, confidence, and get small victories that we can put or hold in our grasp and celebrate that, not to be egocentric, but more self-fulfilling. Like I can do this. I'm finding a better version of myself that I maybe lost in the last 12 months. So.
Yeah. What other signs or signals would you say might be just signaling, hey, there's burnout in kids? Somebody that's on the live stream said, resilience is not all it's cracked up to be. They might go into more detail, but I think that idea for what I hear in that is if I'm a teenager and I'm just being told, like, be resilient, just hang on. There's almost a sense of being invalidated in that of like, I don't think you understand how challenging this is. Mm-hmm. Would that kind of not continually being invalidated be part of burnout, or are those kind of two separate things?
No, it can happen, accidentally by the good nature of those trying to wrap that person with support and not knowing possibly the harm or the discomfort that they're creating that's not elevating the function, or it could come from that experience within that system, whether it be a student or as a employee in a job. I think I try to go back to honoring the fact that resiliency doesn't mean that you have armor that is 100% protecting your physical, social, emotional well-being. It's far from that. It's really the armor is in the understanding cognitively that you're not perfect, that you will experience discomfort. And when it starts moving into the shadows of or the zone of pain, and you start looking at those 4 pillars of self-care, socialization, academic job performance, and activity level, if those are suffering too, that should be cause for pause to say, something's not balanced here. Something's not as close to how I remember myself to be. So therefore I need to do something, whether it's that establish that baseline, whether it be confide in a trusted friend or a partner to give feedback, or whether it's professional outreach. I need to do something and not only move my lips, but move my hands and feet to affect a deeper understanding and different outcomes to honor the concerns I have right now in my thought process.
No, that's really good. Amanda just sent me a note that her internet went down, so hopefully she'll join us again. But you've used that phrase a couple of times, Jim, and I want to get a little bit more out of that. Not just move my lips, but move my hands and feet. Is that in reference to those pillars of care: the eating, the sleeping, the physical and social help? So what would that look like, whether it's a teenager, child, or an adult? What are some examples of moving their hands?
Yeah, I'll give you a real life example. I was working with a student throughout this whole year. They experienced, they had some pre-existing mental health, anxiety, depression, well managed, high functioning academically, socially, activity, engagement, everything, all those markers were at an exceptional level, even while managing mental health. So a lot to celebrate there. And then with this whole shift from hybrid to digital, it really, by no fault of the students, it just really threw that student into an internal pandemic, if you will, that caused that student to have to be hospitalized and was treated, stabilized. and now is back in our digital family again, and soon to be transitioned into hybrid in the next 2 weeks, which is all to be celebrated. Don't get me wrong. But in that whole journey, there was 30, 40, 50, maybe 60, I don't want to exaggerate, but at least that 30 to 50 range of missing assignments that were accumulated just because of that complete mental illness and that dysfunction, that depletion. All systems were not working. And even though one system, you could go out and run 10 miles at your best personal record, that's great, but that doesn't always take care of the social piece or your academic piece. So you have to find a little bit of balance in holding on to all four of those quadrants to say, I don't have to run 10 miles a day, but it'd be great if I could walk every day, and maybe every other day I run 2 miles. And do everything in moderation and do it more frequently rather than do it less and cause more damage or pain or discomfort. What we've done, at Rosemont High School, our administration has been phenomenal with creating other pathways for compensation for students to come in and be part of. Hey, welcome back.
Hi.
Hi. Hopefully it wasn't anything we said.
We had the internet go down all at once in our whole house, which has never happened before. So,
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
And we were just talking about real life examples of, how do you attend to the topic of resiliency, grit, and rebuild. And the student that I was working with, or what we've done at Rosemont High School is every day the students can come in, socially isolate and distance with masks, and they can physically do their Zooms in different parts of our building that is compliant with all guidelines. It gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them a reason to shower. It gives them a reason to put on a different outfit. It gets them outside to feel the cold air on their cheeks. It gives them a reason to stop at Quick Trip and get a beverage. And then to come in and actually see other people, get a shout out from their favorite teacher, find their home spot, maybe in the cafeteria or the library, and then they put on their headphones and then they Zoom 9 to 1, just like they would isolated in their bedroom. And then we serve them breakfast and we serve them lunch. So it really fulfills a lot of those 4 domains that otherwise have been depleted. And then on Wednesdays, it's really a no student contact day, but students come in to really buckle down and say, okay, I've got these missing assignments. I really want to take a chunk out of these and get caught up. Well, this student knocked out probably 20 to 30 of those missing assignments in one day. So, the power of change, of environment and reboots, is just giving across all 4 of those domains, where it just really took a change, a spark. And hence why today I was, at Rosemont High School working on site, because I had been in this space for the last 3-4 days and I needed something different. I just knew that was going to be my spark for today. So, resiliency, once again, doesn't equal perfection. Our armor is not foolproof. I mean, there's always going to be bumps and bruises, but, what do we know what we feel, we talk about what we feel, but then what are we going to do about it? And that was my question to her. We can look at Schoology all day long and we can see, what you're missing, but what are you going to do about it? What's our plan together here?
And if a student is in a distressed state, is that still a good question? I mean,
I look at that specific example of distress. It's like, how could you, and I told her this, I said, how could you expect not to be in this position? I mean, this is completely logical. It's completely congruent. It's completely expected. No different than if you stub your toe on the side of the couch, you should feel pain. That's part of the exchange. So, there is definitely a normalness to that, if you will, and a validation, like this isn't out of, sync with where we should be. We're actually, work away right where we should be with our stress. But the key then is in distress, that middle zone, what are we going to do about it? What's our plan? What are we going to do? Move our hands and our legs and our feet to create positive change so we can move back into that embodiment of solid mental health. Like, I've got this. I'm not perfect, but gosh, I did this well. Because if we continue just to talk about it, often, a student's going to slip back down into more of that mental illness where they don't have traction and they see less options, hopelessness, and other things to come with that.
And so even as that's really, really helpful. Thank you for the practical and real example. So even a student who would be burned out or in those levels of burnout could find or would find that question helpful, validating, empowering. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, and just to stretch it out a little bit further, woven into that would come the reveal by myself or any trusting adult, hopefully, to say, let's brainstorm, 5 solutions to this problem. There's always, more than one solution, so there's always a way out of the weeds, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, sorry to interrupt.
We're not just saying that you're stuck here, too bad, so sad, or that there's limited options. Because, as I found myself, stuck in weeds over several different issues throughout my lifespan, it was usually that person on the shoreline that said, hey, Jim, have you ever thought about swimming this way or coming that way or going that way? And it's like, I was so focused on my struggle, my strain, and ruminating on that. I really didn't see that there was 3 other solutions within my grasp. That doesn't take away the discomfort or the distress. It doesn't give me a free pass not to do those 30 to 50 assignments. But at least I've got a pathway for progress and resiliency in that grit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Just that idea of pathway to progress. And then, the other thing I heard is, what are 5 different solutions? Or let's try to come up with 5 different solutions of how to tackle that. What I'm hearing is that is a great question to ask, even a kid who's struggling, even a student who feels like they're at the end of their rope. I mean, validate them, but then, like, did we expect anything different? And then, okay, so now what are some ways that we could tackle this? What are some ways that you can go after this? Amanda, other things that, for a person who we're kind of talking in those, like, burnout, in those realms where, there's these 4 arenas of our life and at least 2 of them are depleted. And sort of what's a helpful step in saying, hey, how can we go forward here? Or what has worked with the people you've worked with when they're depleted in multiple areas? Because what I heard when you were gone, I heard Jim saying, we can't just focus on one area and be like, well, this one's good, even though these 3 are awful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can't sleep my way out of the pandemic. I can't social media my way out of the pandemic. I can't video game my way out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say that's a similar approach to what I tend to take, right? Is like, let's focus on what we can do. What can we control right now? What can I do today? That's a small step, to get myself to feeling better. I think part of what I tend to hear from a lot of people is this idea of feeling better is we're thinking about the end goal, right? I want to feel better tomorrow. I want to feel, yes, like I'm just thinking the big, 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 broad picture about how I need to feel different than I do right now. But I get stuck in feeling hopeless because the things around me aren't changing, and I want them to change so I can feel better. And what a lot of what I tend to focus on is, okay, let's break it down into something that is small and manageable. What can you do today? Whether it's a student, behind in homework assignments or struggling emotionally, feeling stuck, or if it's as an adult, maybe you're just feeling like I just can't pay attention anymore, or maybe I'm not productive anymore in my work. I'm distracted because I've got kids pulling on me all day, or I'm just overwhelmed and I can't get out of bed. Sometimes we just have to take the smallest little tiniest step to get toward there and stop focusing on like, I need to be there now.
Yeah.
And So that's what I tend to encourage a lot of the people that I work with is just let's think about, okay, if you want to get out of bed, what's one small tiny little step that we could take towards getting out of bed today? And maybe it's just like taking a drink of water, and we'll go, we'll focus on the next step beyond that to get you eventually there. Even if it's like sometimes things like that can feel monumental. So, mhm.
One of our listeners commented on, does what has worked before? Can we try what's worked before? Is that has that been a helpful tool? I mean, some might say, well, it doesn't work before. It doesn't
Right.
work before.
Well, I saw that question come through, and and Amanda mentioned this earlier, the analogy of the toolbox, and Rob, you mentioned this, and any good builder, reputable builder, is not going to show up at the job site with just one tool in their box.
Mhm.
And the tool that they picked to do the job for you maybe wasn't the best choice in the moment. Hence, they put it back and got a more appropriate tool to complete it appropriately to whatever your expectations are. So I think we don't throw away tools, but we also have to realize that there's a rotation of validity for them, and we can't just go to the well and get the same tool every single time expecting the same results. It's improbable, it's not possible. And even though that stinks for some of us because we have our favorite tool, if you will, in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Once again, to get back to your analogy with your daughter's sign in her bedroom, we got to get outside that comfort zone. And it's really appropriate and important that we try to intentionally add new tools, not by happenstance or accident, but what is a new shiny tool that we can say cognitively and proudly that went out, we sought, we tested, we validated that it works for me, and not that I have to prove it to anyone else, and then I put it in my toolbox. For me, it's been meditation. Never meditated in my life, ever. Not to be disparaging, but I didn't see the personal gain or value on that. Because I've never been through a global pandemic before like everyone else. So it really forced me to take a knee and say, you better get a different tool here, or get a couple new ones. And, using, Apple Music and, meditation playlists and whatnot, it's something I try to do daily. So it's a new sharp tool in my toolbox. Does it work every day? No, there's times where I put it on and, after 30 seconds, I'm like, this, it's not going to work. But I got to move on. I'm not going to sit there for an hour and torture myself trying to use this tool that I know is not working in the moment, just as we would hopefully put down a hammer when we're trying to cut a piece of wood and look for the saw.
Yeah, that's helpful. Really helpful, actually. As we start to wind down, this pandemic has been hard, but as you just mentioned, Jim, it has offered, dare I say, gift of gaining new tools. And thank you for sharing one that you've gained during this time. Amanda, have you seen any? Have you learned any tools? Have you seen any blessings, I guess, in this that you've been able to appropriate?
Yeah, I know that can feel like such a I don't know, a heavy thing to think about, like with this pandemic and thinking about there being positives. I can say professionally, one thing I've seen is just people are reaching out who never had the courage to do so before. Um, People are recognizing they need help. And maybe before the pandemic started, you felt like you were doing okay. But all of a sudden, this landed in our laps, and all of a sudden, you realize, like, okay, this is not actually functioning for me. And I think that in and of itself is a gift of just new insights and awareness that we can tackle the things that we've been carrying for a long time. Because right now during this time, maybe those things that we've been struggling with are just they're amplified. And so I look at this as what a perfect opportunity. We're all stuck at home. Why not do some like deeper work on ourselves.
Sure.
And I can say in my own personal life, like that's come up too. I think most of us are tending to see some of the ugly sides of ourselves coming out. And sometimes that's enough just to propel us, to push us um, toward really working on that and finding healthier ways to be. Or maybe it's just I was just kind of existing before all of this happened, and now I realize I want more purpose and more meaning in my life.
Yeah.
Um, so. Mhm.
Yeah, those are great reflections, and I wanted to share one story about a situation I had yesterday. I try to zoom into as many classes as I can at Rosemont High School to, connect with students. And our teachers have done a wonderful job of building strength and capacity around being vulnerable and talking about mental health in their educational families. Even in light of having to do that digitally, which in itself can be a barrier to, sharing out. But we were talking about yesterday with a group of students about, what have you found? What's your blessing? What's your growth, if you will, out of this? And one of the young ladies, I thought I wrote it down, was, she had said that, aside from seeing my Amazon delivery guy more frequently on my doorstep, and she did verify it's her money, it's not her parents' money. So I said, good for you for budgeting. And if you can afford to spend the money, then go for it. But she said sincerely, she's like, I think I found a better version of myself because all of the noise and the artificial trimmings of maybe what we all have ran towards historically for maybe even shallow fulfillment. I don't want to sound judgmental, but she really framed it out to us and her peers that I just sort of I'm more lean and efficient with what I do and how I do it, and I don't have to carry as much baggage that either is self-subscribed or society is encouraging me to do that. And out of that, I have clarity and a better version of myself. I thought that was powerful for a
Wow.
16-year-old to share that out, not only to someone that she just met and via Zoom 8 minutes before, but also in front of her peers, and obviously her teacher, who's done a wonderful job of creating that trust in that community.
That's incredible. Really incredible. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
As I think about one of the crazy, again, I say it gently, but blessings of the pandemic, one of the gifts is there's a lot of parts of, I work in a church, and so faith is a big part of what I do, but there's a lot of things in the church that can sound like faith, but actually might be busyness or activity, not to activity more than busyness. And what the pandemic has done has been challenging for a lot of churches, but it has also focused a lot of churches back to prayer, back to stillness, back to silence, contemplation, meditation. Some of the quieter virtues that I think, frankly, a lot of, not all, but a lot of the churches had kind of put on the back shelf or even in the recycling bin. And it's something that not just our church, but like me personally, I've also found myself, I might even say, enjoying more. And that's been something that's been really helpful for my mental health. Have you found anything in the people you've worked with along those lines? You mentioned meditation, Jim, but just, knowing some of the people on the call might be a part of our church or might be a part of a church, and yet they're really grieving, a lot of them not being able to be with their community. So
Sure.
Feeling that lack of social support, even people who aren't in churches, just a smaller social circle. We're still in small circles. Some people are in non-circles. Would you have any final pieces of wisdom for along those lines?
Well, first I would validate wherever they're at, first and foremost. They know themselves best, and where they plant themselves on that continuum is 100% correct. And I think, any good therapist, clinician, pastor, I mean, we're all, I think, cut from the same strand of being helpers. And, we meet our family and friends where they're at, right? And we go to them, and we, like you said earlier, Amanda, propel. I like that. But one thing that I've tried to impress upon our students, and even in the ER, is faith. It is sometimes kept in the shadows. Sometimes it's all that a student wants to talk about, or maybe an ER patient. But whether it's faith or belief, interchangeable to some degree, not trying to diminish the spiritual piece. I try to set the sequence to them that if you believe in something, whether it be your resiliency, your progress, your ability, or traditional faith, that's going to equal confidence, which then is going to equal the ability to predict, or predictability, because we like to know what's around the corner. And when we get increased predictability, we get healthy control, because our outcomes are matched up with our expectations for all the right reasons. And then at the end of that, we feel safe. And when we feel safe, we can learn, we can progress, we can grow, we can mend, we can heal and prosper. So, safety, starting with the end in mind, is the ultimate goal. And I think a lot of our students and our community members, they feel like their safety has been threatened the last year, not only from that traditional health standpoint, but also, economically, employment-wise, relationally. There's a lot of underpinnings here. So trying to work from faith to safety and build that resiliency and that capacity for confidence and predictability, and then also that control helps people get to what you were saying, that calmness, stillness, and seeing it as a extended journey rather than a checklist. It's not a thing you can do on Saturday morning. It's more of a process and a rinse and repeats over and over again.
Thanks. That's great. Amanda, anything to add?
I think that's quite a wonderful description of that, Jim. I think, in terms of like how we're coping, I think a big foundational piece is just our sense of hopefulness, right? And faith, I think, plays a very large role in that, whatever faith looks like for you. But I absolutely like to encourage, the people that I work with to seek out uh, connection with other people who share some similar values, or whether that's a traditional like faith system that you're talking about, or if it's for some of us, it's getting active and getting involved in finding ways to connect with and serve a bigger purpose than yourself, even right now. I know that all of us are in a different place, each and every one of us, in terms of what we can do, and what we're experiencing, what we're stressed by through the pandemic.
Yeah.
But for those of us that may be experiencing, like, coming from a place of privilege, there are ways that we can create some meaning and purpose just in doing things like doing laundry for other people who are unable to do that. Getting involved with delivering meals and other kind of like simple things like that can really get us also focusing outside of ourselves. And I think that's also an important piece, that can tend to get neglected because we get just kind of stuck in internalizing all the stuff that we're struggling with. So
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I've also seen just a diminished opportunities to serve or be outside of ourselves in the midst of this. That's one thing I'm hopeful that will come back. But if faith, I mean, it's hard to even say if faith is a unifying thing right now in the midst of polarized politics, a global pandemic, racial tension. So what about hope? How does hope play into all of what we've talked about, just as we wrap up?
Hope is what gets me out of bed every day. I can say that. Hope is the thing that drives us, that gives us a reason to keep on going. And if we can't find something, whatever that thing is, to kind of sink our teeth into, that gives us a sense of hopefulness, then we're just stuck here spinning our wheels. Because I think a big part of the human condition is being propelled towards something bigger, whether that's a goal that we have, or being part of a community, or if it's doing things that just are really meaningful to us. So I think that hope is that number one thing that we most need to get us through this. And that's something that I think, as a therapist, that's my job to hold for people. Is
Mm.
you walk in my virtual office in my room, and it's my role to be the one to hold on to hope, because I know that we can get you there and eventually help you to start to feel a sense of hopefulness too. So hope is the large umbrella, I think, over this entire thing, that uh, is what can get us to a better place beyond this pandemic.
Yeah, those are great points. I appreciate you sharing those. And, and to piggyback off of that, I'll go back to that baseline. When I'm assuming, as I do, when I'm working with students or clients, and you're trying to hold on to hope and give them, a light to shine on that. You also then have the privilege, either as the provider or the client, to eventually look back and see that baseline in your rearview mirror, because then you're progressing and you're propelling. Not that you erase it. You always want to look back and be able to see that as a moment of truth and clarity, and as a motivator, because I think, sometimes we forget that baseline too quickly, and then we find ourselves sometimes back into that similar zone of function that we don't like as much, or we feel is beyond just a normal funk, if you will. So I think it's so important to hold that baseline as truth, and when you do that, it gives you far more opportunities to celebrate and amplify successes, rather than redraw the line in the sand as your new baseline tomorrow, when it was the same as it was today. We just decided to erase it. So, I think I would agree with you. Hope is critical, and it gives us space to celebrate.
Well, thank you both so much for being on the call. We hope that you who are listening have found this helpful, have, again, found ways, and maybe even through this call, a couple of tools that you now have in your toolbox as we continue to walk through and work through, hopefully stronger together, and all our togethers. As someone who's a part of a church, I know churches aren't perfect, but the one thing we have is that we are bringers of hope. Ultimately, we believe that even this life and the death is not the end, and that there is a greater purpose than all of this. So if you have questions about any of that, please reach out. If you want or need a referral, or have questions about what we talked about, reach out to the church. We can get you in contact with either Jim, Amanda, or, again, one of our mental health partners and therapy places that we work with. So Jim and Amanda, thank you so much for being on. And again, have a beautiful day and a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I think this is when we go off.